Kiwis love a thirst. Like Finn, we're making waves. Generate. Switch online today.
Cecilia Robinson, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know if anyone's made this connection with you before, but very, very strong Simon and Garfunkel link.
Yes, I love it. Yeah. It's actually surprising how many people actually don't. Maybe it's just an age thing, but yes, I certainly hear it. Cecilia Robinson. It says a lot, right? Yeah.
Because, what was your name before you married Mr. Robinson?
It was Hall. I definitely feel like it upgraded from being like a hallway, effectively, to Robinson. It feels, that was an improvement.
Yeah, for anyone that doesn't know what we're talking about, two of Simon and Garfunkel's biggest songs.
How can they not know, though? But yeah.
I don't know. There's all sorts of different people listening.
Yeah.
Cecilia and Mrs. Robinson, two absolute bangers, and you've got the double barrel.
They are great songs. They're good hits, yeah.
So, absolute powerhouse on the podcast today. There's just an embarrassment of awards. New Zealand Innovator of the Year 2024, Supreme Winner Woman of Influence Awards, Next Magazine Businesswoman of the Year, Young Entrepreneur of the Year.
That feels a long time ago. That's really reaching.
And the HER Businesswoman of the Year 2012. You've done so much over so many years.
Yeah, I just feel like it's been a long time, yeah.
What's one thing that you wish people would stop asking you in interviews, and what's something that you wish people would ask you in interviews?
Oh, I think that's really interesting. I mean, overall, I think people are amazing because they really ask insightful questions. And so, I like to talk about healthcare because I think, we don't have enough people talking about what's actually happening in health. So I want to talk more about what we're actually seeing and how we can actually, part of our purpose at Tend is to help New Zealanders be the healthiest people in the world. And so I love kind of talking about that and talking about, that recent piece of work, maybe then going too kind of far back into the past.
So you like talking about yourself, or you just prefer more to talk about what you do?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question as well. I think part of what you do is a story of who you are. And so it's relevant, right? Like, why did we go into healthcare feeds into the story about our life, and so that's definitely relevant. And so I kind of enjoy talking about, aspects of that. And there's always things that are hard to talk about, but I think you have to have those hard conversations as well.
Yeah, so I find by having these conversations with people, you can... in a way, almost like deconstruct success.
Yeah.
Yeah, work backwards and figure out how someone was so successful. Another successful New Zealander that I've had on the podcast, Sir Peter Beck from Rocket Lab.
Yeah.
He had a quote, and I want to share this with you and see if you agree. Ask any founder running a company. It does feel like a fire hose of shit 100% of the time.
I totally agree with that.
Really?
A fire hose of shit. Yes, it does. Yeah. I mean, I normally say it feels like we're drinking from a fire hose, but yeah, that is what it feels like on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. Yeah, that's it.
He said 100% of the time, and I thought, surely that's drastic.
No, it is. I mean, I feel like I'm in the middle of that currently, and my way of dealing with that, my coping mechanism is to become incredibly calm, basically, because otherwise you just see all the things that have the potential to go wrong or the things that might not work out. And so I think being an eternal optimist while you're drinking shit is kind of the most important thing, right?
Well, why do you keep going then?
Look, it's a really good question. I think for me, the short answer is this is my probably last startup that I'll do. We've landed in a place that is really purposeful in an area that we feel like we can drive a real big difference. And so I don't think I'd do another startup after this. I don't think my nerves can cope any longer because it is really hard. And I think that the level of scrutiny and public criticism, all of these things that come with putting yourself out there, you can only go so long, So I think that's part of it too.
I promise this will be the last name I drop in the podcast, but I had Anna Mowbray on as well, and I asked her the same sort of question. I'm like, okay, you cashed out of Zuru, you got $1 billion if what we read is to be believed. Why not just kick back? Yeah, go on the board of trustees for your kids, or just do some altruistic sort of things. And she sort of described it as like Zuru being a mountain to climb, and there's many more mountains that she wishes to climb. I feel like it's the same sort of thing with you in a way. Yeah,
certainly. I think for us, at the end of the day, what we really are focused on is we want to do things that, are really purposeful and can drive change. And so, big exponential change. And so, my husband and I, tackling healthcare, it's one of the most complicated issues that we can see in New Zealand, but it also has so much opportunity to actually be able to positively change, everything for the future of our people and for our tamariki. So I think that bigger purpose, that it's not just about you, it's not you lounging on a yacht in the Med and thinking life is great. You have to actually look at the society that you want to build around you for your kids, and the legacy. And for us, that legacy is really important.
Could you have, the legacy and make your kids proud and still do the yacht in the Mediterranean?
Yeah, I feel like there is common ground there. There's definitely, there is merit in taking a bit of time off, I think. And look, we did that, we have done that in periods, and we've enjoyed that, right? And there are things that I don't compromise on in my day-to-day life and the way that I live. And I was just saying to you outside that, I do come in to work, at like 9:15. I drop my kids at kindy, I pick them up in the afternoon from school and activities. We're really present parents, and like that comes at the cost of working late into the evening or on weekends. And, the way that, we balance our life is that we're intentfully really present with our kids, and they expect us to show up for them. And that's a really important part of, our happiness.
Is part of it for you like a boredom thing? Like you need to be active, you need to be busy? Because I'm guessing after the success of My Food Bag, you could have just kicked back and done nothing if you wished.
Yes, we could have chosen to do that. And I think for us, we did that for maybe 6 months.
Okay.
So we did quite a bit of travel. We took some time off. We did lots of things like that. And it did become boring. Like I kind of figured out that I thought I'd start drinking coffee, but, still not a coffee drinker. I thought I'd start playing tennis, and turns out I'm pretty rubbish at it. Lucky that I haven't taken out any windows in the process. So, you do find stuff that you think that you're going to do or spend your time doing. And part of the reason actually why we founded Tend was because we did look at a lot of kind of charitable vehicles, and we did kind of go ahead and make a lot of donations in that space. And what we found was that it was actually better to apply our skill set alongside our capital to try to drive change rather than just kind of provide the capital and not be able to make a big impact. And so that's how we landed where we are today.
Well, you've got so much to offer, don't you? And skills and lessons and learnings. And
you'd hope so.
Yeah, Tend, you've mentioned Tend a couple of times. We will get into that deeper later on. But elevator pitch. What is Tend? So
Tend is a technology-powered healthcare company that is transforming the way that we're delivering healthcare in New Zealand. It's a fantastic kind of once-in-a-generation opportunity to really think about how we rebuild primary care. And so that's what I spend my day-to-day doing. Like, how do we solve this crisis that we have on our hands?
To use the mountain analogy, this is a big one.
Yeah, it's a huge mountain to climb. And I think often when you start climbing those mountains, you might be a little bit naive, like super curious, and a little bit naive about the challenge ahead. I think probably without a little bit of naivety and a lot of curiosity, you probably wouldn't get climbing. And so, I look at it now versus where we were when we started back in 2019, and it's been, one hell of a journey.
Because you've been going with Tend for like 5 years now?
Yeah, it's a long time.
So if this was Everest, are you at base camp yet? Or are you still...
I keep saying to people, in terms of driving change, we're probably only 5% of the way through where we want to get to. And so it's a huge mountain ahead, but we've really laid the foundation and the groundwork on it. And I think that's what's been... just so powerful, is actually having that platform now to be able to drive, significant change.
I heard in another interview you talking about ideas and startups. You said it's 1% the idea and 99% the execution.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What other ideas have you had that you never implemented?
I have like a list of things. Really, when we came out of My Food Bag, we looked at kind of like starting like a mentoring company or something like Mentor Me or something to actually be able to kind of give more time back into the community. I mean, we already do a lot of that work kind of for the King's Trust in New Zealand, but how you kind of formalise that. But what I like is tackling really big systematic issues, and I think we've landed in the space where we can look at things like healthcare and see a lot of the problems that are contributing to where we are today, but also the solutions leading through that. And that's what is, so interesting, is solving some of those big ticket items.
As well as Tend, another thing you've been busy on at the moment is this B416 campaign to make social media illegal for under 16s
Well,
or
basically,
inaccessible?
so what we're looking to do is introduce a minimum age for social media of 16. And so, there's been a lot of research over a long period of time that has demonstrated that there is something that's happened in our young people from when the introduction of the smartphone, when the camera was introduced, and also when social media really started to take off, right? And we're seeing these exploding mental health presentations. And, 1 in every 4 teens in New Zealand is presenting with severe or very severe mental health illness. And that was one of the eye-opening moments that I had coming into healthcare. I was shocked at how many young people we're seeing in our primary healthcare system. And what you have to understand about primary care is that while primary care also incorporates mental health, that's not been the role for a lot of GPs. And in fact, a lot of GPs will say that, I came here to kind of treat, physical injuries. And while my role has expanded, this is not what I was qualified to do. And so, hearing and listening to the narrative and trying to understand, what is the source of the problem here. And I think it's really interesting how we go out of our way to really protect our children in the real world. You'll remember, and I love that you'll relate to this because sometimes I say this and people glaze over, but, the video store days where, there'd be that 18 plus area that was the area that had
squeaky
porn
doors.
and, squeaky doors, and it was a little bit creepy, right? And, there are ratings on movies about how we think that children should be watching different content depending on what their age is. So for a long time, we've gone out of our way to protect our kids. And, we've got a minimum driving age. We've got a minimum age for you to purchase alcohol, a minimum age for you to, purchase tobacco products. But there's no minimum age for social media. And the reality of it is that it is changing the way that the chemistry in our children's brain is developing. And that is not a good thing from what we're seeing in the health system.
Yeah.
And so we cannot afford as a country to have, the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. We have to put the fence up. And, I think the most pragmatic way to do that is to really change social norming around it. And by social norming, I mean, it's really hard to be the parent that says no to your kids. It's hard to be the one person that steps up and goes, actually, you can't have Snapchat. And of course, I am the parent that says no to that. But the consequence of that is social exclusion. So I think what we need to do is introduce a minimum age to enable parents to have a tool to say no. And, aspirationally work towards onboarding, 80-90% of our population onto this idea that actually we need to protect them not just in the physical world, but also in the online world.
Mm. Yeah, when I heard that, I thought it was an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah.
It seems to make common sense. But then I saw a couple of posts online from Jazz Thornton and Genevieve Moira from Voices of Hope, who've done a lot in the mental health space, and they offered sort of a counter-argument, and I thought, okay, I can see it from their point too now. I suppose that's just me, I'm mouldable. But their sort of thing is there's a lot of people that feel, I don't know, isolated or marginalised, and social media lets them find a connection or find those people?
Well, actually, the research actually demonstrates that the children who are most at risk actually suffer more harm from being online and being in those environments. So while it might be a support network currently for those that are experiencing it, it's not a go-forward position. And so we also have to ask questions around how some of the, mental health charities and those types of entities are funded in this country because, what's interesting about the likes of, social media companies is that a lot of them are acting in a way like tobacco companies have been for a long period of time, right? And so they're trying to fund initiatives to, put the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, right? And so you have to ask questions around why is that happening? And, do we genuinely believe as adults that this is a safe place for our children? And, you and I talked about it before we started filming because I think most adults will look themselves in the mirror and say, I am addicted to social media. I'm addicted to my phone. And I recognise that that's a problem. But how do you break that habit? How do you break that cycle? And what children actually need is they need the one-on-one engagement. They need to be out with a ball on the grounds on a weekend and spending 42 hours online, which is the average for New Zealand children, which is an out-of-date statistic from...
42 hours?
Children in New Zealand spend 42 hours online.
Per week?
Per week. And so that is a full-time job. And, they're getting, 290 notifications a day. And again, I was saying to you walking in that I feel guilt because, my friends will message me on WhatsApp, on Instagram, on Facebook Messenger. They'll text me, they'll email me, and I'm constantly lagging behind. And I'm an adult dealing with that pressure, but it's not a pressure that we should be putting on our children while they still have developing brains, right? And so... the reason why I came into this was very much from a public health point of view. I was becoming a mum of a 10-year-old or 11-year-old at the time. He's turning 13 this year. And I started looking at it going, this really doesn't make sense. And so it is quite hard to understand the problem if you're not an adult seeing what these children are battling on a day-to-day basis. And so is there a space online for children to be able to have conversations about, their life and their identity and all these things? But does it need to happen before the age of 16? Probably not, right? And so before that age, we need to be encouraging them to be engaging with their communities, doing sports, reading books, listening to music, being bored. Isn't boredom one of the most wonderful things in the world that's totally underrated, right? And so those are the types of things we need to be bringing into the conversation about how we, mentally equip and, build emotional resilience in our young people. Because as someone who's running a startup, I can tell you the qualities that I'm looking for in people coming on board with Tend. It's like I need people who are emotionally resilient. I need people who are able to actually deal with adversity, and we're not building that well in the online world, So, yeah, that's how I think about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone to some degree is subjected to some sort of bullying at school, eh? Like I don't know, kids are just nasty, but like when I was growing up, home was sort of like a sanctuary.
Totally.
It was the reprieve
Absolutely.
for a few hours a day. So I can't imagine what it's like, the bullies having access to you 24/7.
This is what our paediatrician, Dr. Manish Deva, talks about. And he talks about what he's seeing in the hospital system currently. And, he talks about how children used to go home, and as you say, it was a safe haven. But what's actually happening now is that is a time that we see most and worst presentations in our system, because over the school week, children have an opportunity to see each other the next day and work out their issues, right? But the problem is school holidays, weekends, it just becomes really nasty and spirals online, and there's no opportunity for these children to kind of resolve their issues in person. And so it spirals and it gets out of control, and then they see that presenting in the hospital system. And I think it's actually really interesting here because, we're calling for more resource for mental health, right? And that's a really important part, although, as a country, we actually fund health well. And so if you go back to 2018, we were funding health about $17 billion a year. We fund it $30 billion now, but our healthcare outcomes are worse. And so you have to say, how do you push the fence at the top of the cliff? How do you ensure that we actually have appropriate resource available? And we cannot burn out our workforce in that process. And so that's kind of how I think about it. Like we can't just, we know already what the harm we're seeing from social media. What will that look like in 5 years' time if we do nothing? I don't think we're in a position when we can do nothing. I genuinely don't.
Well, good on you, and thanks for this. And it's going to be very interesting to follow the progress of B416 and see where it lands. Right, let's go back to the early years of Cecilia Robinson.
Sure.
So you're from Sweden.
Yes.
Yeah. What are your early memories of Sweden? What are your earliest sort of memories?
I mean, Sweden is a really interesting place to grow up, and I feel incredibly privileged to live, and have been from Sweden. But I guess part of my early memories is that my dad was from the UK, and I always had a really strong sense of belonging, not necessarily to Sweden, but more probably to the Anglo-Saxon culture. And so I often felt a little bit out of place, like I didn't quite fit in Sweden, didn't quite fit in the UK, didn't quite understand, where I would find my path in life. And so, while it was a really amazing place to grow up, and Sweden's got so many fantastic things about it, in terms of how we think about public funding, how our school systems are structured broadly from a taxpayer point of view. We've got really high taxes, but that's kind of rewarded through infrastructure and through public schooling and through our health system, etc. Right? But there's also lots of, over time, there's become quite a lot of issues, socialists in Sweden. So since, I moved to New Zealand, the nicest thing I think someone ever said about me was that while I wasn't New Zealand born, I've been New Zealand made, and so this is my country, and I 100% feel like I belong here. So I found that.
Oh no, we're very lucky to have you. You've made a massive difference to New Zealand society. So your parents are both teachers, and I've heard you describe yourself as like lower to middle class.
Yeah.
What does lower to middle class look like in Sweden?
Well, probably middle class, right?
Okay.
It's probably where, we belong. I mean, my parents worked really, really hard. Money was always a conversation that was difficult in our family. And
Just
so,
never enough.
and I think constantly, a source of like argument and discussion and friction, right? And so I remember thinking when I was quite young from an early age that I wanted to grow up and be financially free. And my husband, I was actually just having this conversation with me on the weekend, and he was saying to me, he was talking to me about before 16 and the drivers behind while I was doing it. And when I met him, when I was only 20, I'd said to him, I wanted to be a lawyer and I wanted to be, I wanted to work for the prosecution. I wanted to work on the side of good. That's where I wanted to spend my life. But I also wanted to ensure that I had, that I was in an occupation where I was paid well, but I could also make change, right? So he's like, what you're doing now isn't different from where you started, just not how you imagined it quite, right? And so it was a good reminder of, how, you shape your conversation over time and how you shape, maybe the dreams that you had into something different, but it still lands you where you thought you'd be, right? So
yeah, what about your family values and mindset? Like, was there anything to suggest that you'd be an entrepreneur, or was it just like the fear of poverty or knowing that you wanted something?
Well, I think my parents always worked really hard. So my dad had his own company. So my dad is a teacher, or not fundamentally, he actually has a degree in economics from a university in London. But when he came to Sweden at like 25, didn't speak the language, had met my mum, 10 or so, a little bit less than a decade earlier, and had to start from scratch, right? Because a degree means nothing in a country where you don't speak the language. And so he had to learn Swedish from scratch, try to integrate into society, which was very different then, in the 70s versus what, it is today. It's much easier to be someone from the UK and Sweden now. And what happened with him was that he went away and he realised he actually learned Swedish. He speaks better Swedish than I do, and he's very kind of eloquent, both in writing and the way he articulates himself, and discovered a niche in terms of being able to kind of teach business English to corporates like Scania. And so he'd translate kind of the difficult technical language between Swedish and English, and had his own business. But I remember vividly my dad getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning every day and not getting home until 7 or 8 o'clock at night, right? And he'd drive an hour in each direction. He was always commuting, always on the road, working really hard. And my mum was working as a teacher at a school that was maybe about 20 minutes, half an hour away from our house. And, just that kind of discipline around working really hard. And it is different living in Sweden. You've got a whole different, conditions. You're dealing with snow and ice and grit. And so the environment is quite different on a day-to-day basis, how you live your life. And, my parents always, showed up and was, they were really clear around the fact that, having a career working hard was really important, because if you don't, things can quickly spiral away from you. So, yeah, it wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't say it was an expectation, but it was certainly part of the way that we were brought up, to be resilient. Biking home by yourself was, the common thing. You'd get home and you'd make yourself afternoon tea. And I remember I went through this phase, and I must have been about 9, and I was responsible for cooking dinner, and we'd literally eat tomato soup every night of the week, because I was cooking dinner and it was the only thing I knew how to cook. And so, yeah, teaching kids independence and resilience through, allowing them to be able to do different things was important.
Why don't you just go to IKEA for lunch every day?
That's a good question. I mean, they do amazing meatballs, and I'm not going to lie, I'm very excited about IKEA coming and having meatballs for lunch. My kids are amped. In fact, you will probably laugh about this, but I literally did have Swedish, so I packed their lunchboxes this morning and made them. They have mash with Swedish meatballs and lingonberry jam in their lunchboxes today. So yeah, that's our lunch, and I'm a little bit jealous actually.
Yeah, good. So you pursued your dream. You went to law school. You went to university to study law.
Very briefly, yeah.
Yeah, how long?
So I started a degree in Sweden, and then that was about maybe 3 or 4 months, and then I came back to New Zealand, and I was meant to just kind of come back and travel here, and then ended up staying, and then I started a degree at Auckland University. And at the same time, we'd started OPL Link. And in the end, probably after a year or two of study, maybe 18 months of Auckland University studying, my mentor at the time said, you can't do everything. You can't work full-time, have OPL Link full-time and study full-time. That's a lot of full-time. That's 120 hours a week. And so something has to give, and what are you going to give up? And I was like, university? He was like, that sounds sensible. So. Oh,
okay. Oh, that makes sense. I thought there might be some story, like you studied law and then you realised you were disillusioned. And
nah.
Okay, so the issue was you were like an entrepreneur and a student at the same time?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realise there was an overlap
and also
there.
Worked at the same time. And so I was trying to do everything.
What job were you doing?
I was working as an administrator for a company called Beyond Recruitment at that point, just off Simon Street. Quite convenient because the university's just down the road, so I'd be able to kind of juggle both, right? And I was quite speedy in the way that I did my work, and I kind of kept asking them to give me more, but they didn't have much more work. And so in the end, I actually ended up starting OPL Link from their offices because I was bored. I'd get through the work that I was meant to do in a day in a couple of hours, and then I just started dabbling with other stuff. So thanks Beyond Recruitment. Yeah.
So from what I can gather, you moved to New Zealand.
Yes.
You met your husband the day you arrived?
Yeah, the night I arrived. Yeah.
he's a friend of your brother's.
Yeah, so the story kind of goes, my brother moved to New Zealand first, and he had a girlfriend that him and his girlfriend moved to New Zealand, and then they kind of broke up, and she went back to Sweden. And I was quite concerned about him at that point. I was concerned about him being alone in this, new country and not having a good support mechanism in place. And so I asked him from a kind of keeping tabs on him point of view to give me the details of one of his mates, and I'd connect with him and talk to him regularly about whether, how he was tracking. And so he actually gave me James's contact details. So we actually started chatting for MSN 6 months before I came to New Zealand. And it kind of started out us talking about my brother and how he was going and what they were doing, and, evolved into, deeper conversations about kind of all the things that I guess you don't explore for a long time in your relationships, like politics, religion, having kids. And then when I arrived in New Zealand, we fell in love. So, yeah, that was kind of cool.
Oh, so you were having these conversations over MSN?
Before we'd even met.
Right. Okay. Well, so it was almost like a pen pal situation.
Kind of, yeah. Very like modern day pen pal, yeah.
So when you got here, were you excited about meeting him? Because did you know what he looked like?
Yeah, I did. He was definitely cute. So yeah.
Right. Because there would have been social media then in terms of like MySpace or Bebo.
Oh, yeah, totally. But we weren't on it. So
did you know what he looked like? Or?
I did. Yeah, I did know. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think in hindsight you or him were falling in love over the messaging?
I don't know. I mean, gosh, I probably. Potentially, like at least starting to like each other and enjoy each other's company and being able to have quite open conversations.
So when you were flying here, did you have sort of butterflies?
I was definitely interested in meeting him. Although, again, like I was definitely, it was very, the conversations that we had were very much in regards to kind of broad stuff, and it never kind of passed any, into another area until we met in person. I also, I actually probably had a boyfriend back in Sweden at that point, so it probably wouldn't have been, the right way to go down.
Oh, what happened to him? Did you jump in before you got on the plane?
No, borderline, yeah. Okay. Definitely didn't.
No comment on this one? We're just not your proudest moment.
Probably not entirely, so yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a great story, eh?
Yeah, it's a good story. Yeah.
Especially like you're still together, you've got 3 kids, you've set up these amazing businesses
together. We've been together like half my life. So we met when I was 20, and so actually in September this year we would have been together for half my life, yeah.
So when you get to New Zealand and you meet, it's a fairly instant sort of...
Yeah, I mean, within I think... we kind of discussed it, went back and forth, and started seeing each other. But then I was always going to go back to Sweden, but my husband is quite good. Like he kind of nailed me down and asked me to be his girlfriend, and and then 6 months or so later, asked me to move in with him, and we were married by the time I was 23, and so it was. It was a whirlwind, and, what I've been really grateful for is just the fact that I get to do every day with my best friend. Like, we know each other inside and out. We understand each other's stories. We trust each other implicitly. We get to do everything together, and he's so incredibly humble in regards to the work that we do, because we've always done it together, and somehow I end up fronting it. It's not necessarily because that's my comfortable spot either. But that's how it's turned out. And, he contributes just as much as I do, work alongside each other every day, managing different sides of our businesses throughout this entire period. And we're just lucky to do it together.
Yeah, you're a good team. I'm sorry, just skipping back a couple of steps. So, did you break up with the guy in Sweden?
I did actually break up.
No, my girlfriend's in New Zealand.
Yeah, no, there was definitely, there was definitely some conversations that we had once I came into New Zealand and realised that I had met someone different, and so, youth. It's an interesting phase to go through.
Yeah. How do you think your life and career would look now if you hadn't met James and vice versa?
Yeah, completely different. I think...
You're a formidable team, eh?
We genuinely are.
Together.
Yeah, and we do it really well together. And I think, I am innately the risk taker, and he is, a really good person to, risk manage. Although, great entrepreneurs are really great risk managers. Like, you have to be able to understand and manage your risk, right? That's your job. But I've probably got a higher risk appetite than what he does. And so we balance each other out really well. We've found a rhythm of working together that we established back in OP Link days, which has kind of remained true to this day from my food bag and Tend, where we manage quite distinctly different sides of the business, but we work really closely together. And so, I think it drives a culture inside your leadership team of really strong collaboration, because it's not like, a king or queen sitting on top of a council making decisions. You're actually working so closely together with your team, because you're aiming for consensus and you're aiming for robust discussions. And so, yeah, it's worked out really well.
Do you do you have like a hard and fast rule about not talking about work at home, or do you find it's just
sometimes
comes
I wish.
into your mind? And
No, James will literally like roll over to me at 11:30 in bed and talk to me about the upcoming meeting or whatever is top of mind for him, and like 6 a.m. The next morning it starts again. So it would probably be healthy to have some more barriers, but also in a way I don't think it would be healthy, because if you start to kind of like I guess compartmentalize part of your life, then that becomes really problematic. And so instead of kind of having these constant discussions about, what's top of mind for you is important. But there's no boundaries between work and life. It is just life for us. And that's the way that we manage it.
Yeah, and some people would see that as potentially problematic, but that's up to them. Like when I had Sir Peter Beck on the podcast, he said, for what he's trying to achieve, and if you're trying to achieve a big thing, you can't really do it on a 9-to-5 schedule. Yeah,
no, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. And each to their own. Like, who is anyone else to judge?
Yeah, I mean, some days we wish we had a 9-to-5 schedule, right? And like that you didn't have all the pressure or the scrutiny or the, the responsibility on your shoulders, but also when we have those moments, I kind of look at him or he looks at me and we go like, and if it's not us, then who? Like, how are we going to resolve these systematic problems that we have? And so you feel kind of a lot of accountability and responsibility in that space as well.
So you and James are parents to 3 kids.
Yeah.
What are their ages? There's a big gap between 2 and 3.
Yes.
A COVID baby?
We had a COVID baby. We were one of those people. So we have an almost 13-year-old and then we have a 9-year-old. And like we had, I look at it now and, knowing, having had fertility journeys as well, it was a really challenging period for us. And, we had a stillborn baby, then we lost another baby at 17 weeks. And so our daughter came along quite later from what we initially imagined. So our son was almost 4 at that point. And then we kind of got to we understood what was driving the issues that we were having. And when COVID happened, we decided, well, we'll see if this can happen again, because we didn't feel like our family was quite complete. And, Charlie came along, which was quite a delightful surprise to both James and I. And so, really lucky. But he is 3 and, the whole raising a toddler at the same time as raising a teenager, it brings complexity. I did not think that through, I did not think, and I'm normally quite a structured person who gives a lot of thought into how something will look into the future. But I didn't think that I'd be talking to my 13-year-old about, puberty and my 3-year-old about pulling his pants up, right? It's very different
life stages.
Different life stages. There's something for everyone in there, And it's relentless, right? It's relentless because, our 13-year-old, like last night, he has debating practice after school. He doesn't get back home until 8. He has soccer 6 nights a week. The little one still got up sick the other night. So, you are living off fumes because you're constantly, someone needs you the whole time. And, the needs, they don't stop needing you because they get bigger. They just need you in a different way. They need you to show up for them, to be there at soccer practice, to be there for games, to be there for debating, all of these things, right? And so it's a juggle. But, God, we're so lucky to have them. So, yeah.
For the older 2, did you have any sort of medical intervention like IVF or ICSI?
Well, we actually didn't. So with Tom, we had multiple miscarriages before we had him, and then we were lucky. We ended up on Clexane, and I was able to carry him to full term. And then with Layla, they did a similar intervention for us to be able to get pregnant. But then the problem was that I couldn't stay pregnant. And so, that's quite traumatizing, clearly. When you have, we went for over 20 weeks with our first baby that was stillborn, and that was really difficult, right? And so, and then I think the problematic thing was after that the clinicians or the doctors at that point kind of said, oh, well, look, lightning doesn't strike twice. You should just go again. There's nothing wrong with you. And then we had a similar experience the next year, losing another baby at 17 weeks. And I lost the girls within a day of each other. So the year prior on June 24th, I'd found out that we lost the baby. And on June 23rd, the next year, I lost the second baby. And that was emotionally, physically, for everyone, it was really hard, right? And you just don't know what's wrong. But for us and for me, I kind of just ended up on this, problem-solving mission to try to identify what was going wrong and what was happening. And, didn't take the advice that lightning doesn't happen 3 times and actually went to get appropriate advice from the right people who then we were lucky enough to be able to have Layla and carry her for to full term, which we were incredibly grateful for, and then go on to have Charlie in a similar way. So, it's been one heck of a journey. And I often think when people look at us now or they see photos of Instagram, like it is, it's not an overnight success story. Like, you don't just have, it's not easy. And so really acknowledging that on Mother's Day as well, because I always think about the fact that, 11 years ago, James gave me this gorgeous little outfit for a baby girl that we knew we were expecting. And then, 8 weeks later, we lost her. And so you just don't know what people's journeys look like, right? You just have no clue. And you can't assume just because they kind of have everything that they've ever wanted that they can't empathise with you, because in fact many people can, right? And so, it's a hard thing.
Yeah, I don't have any kids of my own. When JJ and I were together, we went through years and years of fertility treatment. The closest we got was during IVF, where there's the embryo and it divides and it splits and then it gets reimplanted. So we were technically pregnant, I think, for maybe a week or a couple of weeks before she lost it. And that was, so much work went in to get to that point.
There.
It was fucking heartbreaking. It was devastating. So I cannot imagine just how devastating it is to be like midway through your second trimester pretty much, and to lose a child then.
Yeah, it was really hard, and I think the circumstances made it even more difficult because Tom was quite little. He was only 18 months, and we'd recently moved to Australia, and so we'd packed up kind of our family. I didn't pack any clothes that weren't maternity wear, and so it wasn't like I was in Auckland and, I arrived into Australia. We were launching my food bag into Australia. We were still running my food bag in New Zealand. We were still running OPL Link in New Zealand. We were selling OPL Link in New Zealand, and so we had a lot of pressure. And I think, when we lost that first baby, I really felt like it was my fault, like the amount of pressure I'd put myself under, and my body in particular, dealing with that level of ongoing kind of stress. And also when, the doctor said, well, there's kind of nothing wrong with you, there's nothing wrong with your husband, the baby was fully healthy, so this is like her heart's just stopped beating. And two things that they said. One is that you're probably lucky because there might have been something seriously wrong, and, two, lightning doesn't happen twice, so you should just go again. But I remember vividly, James having to drag me out to buy clothes because, I'd only packed maternity wear with me, and it was the most, kind of awful thing to have to go through and just think about, I'm no longer pregnant, I have to buy things to wear because I have to rock up to, work. And so it was very tangible, the loss. And, you go from having a baby that is, kicking and, arms flying and, you're having a girl and you're quite excited, to then being blindsided because, I didn't bleed or anything. We literally just walked into a scan and her heart was no longer beating. And there's just no explanation. And so that was really difficult, and it was something that I was never prepared to go through. So, they put the probe on your tummy and you're expecting to see your baby. And, instead they go, oh, look, we need to go and get a doctor and someone else needs to assess this, and you just don't know. So that was incredibly hard going through the health system. And, we had quite a big discussion with the clinician because I'd had a really difficult birth with Thomas. They'd said to me to never attempt birth again, and they wanted me to birth the baby because of how late in pregnancy I was. And I just refused because I didn't want to go through that, and I didn't think it was healthy for me, and I didn't think that it would help my healing to hold the baby. And we ended up in a really kind of like a standoff for probably about an hour. And James just stepped in at the end and asked the obstetrician, if this was your wife, what would you be recommending here? Because, of course, I guess it was funny because we actually had health insurance in Australia, and we ended up having to, had a procedure to have the baby. And it's probably cheaper for the system. And this is me talking like a health system person now, to give someone medication and make them have the baby. And there's obviously a lot of mental health benefits for a lot of people, but I didn't feel like that was my right choice. And I feel like women should have the right to choose when they're in a circumstance like that. And so, it was hard. And, that day that we ended up in hospital having the baby was a day that we were expecting to have bids to sell OPL Link in New Zealand. So that was a day we were expecting people to tell us whether or not, we could let go of one of the stresses in our life and whether OPL Link would sell. And that Sunday we were launching my food bag into Australia. And so, we had this runway of stuff that had to be done, and I had to be in hospital. And it was, I woke up and, one of the first questions I asked my husband, which, was like, did we sell OPL Link? Because I just, And he was like, why are you asking me that? Like, that is the least important thing. And I was like, well, we have to take away one of the pressures. Of course, we hadn't had any bids for appealing, so it made that weekend even worse in that instance. So, look, it was really, really hard. And, it builds your resilience. And, like, I look at my daughter today and I wouldn't have it any other way. And I also acknowledge that there are so many people that don't have my ending. And so I'm grateful, but I'm also prepared to be a fierce advocate for those that have gone through this and are going through this, because the system needs to better meet the needs of our patients, right? And so, I think trauma it shapes you there, right?
How big's the fetus at that point? Is it like a fist?
It's a proper baby.
Right.
Like, it's a proper baby. And I remember them saying in Australia, because like they talk about, how early and, how you can go to, 23 weeks and you can deliver. And even if, the baby will often have a lot of complications, they can still go on to live. So I was like, oh my God, I'm just a few weeks off this kind of like milestone. And how did we end up in this position? Because you are fully pregnant. You've got a belly, your breasts have expanded significantly, you're feeling all the motions, and so it felt, it was really hard. And it's a lot of that process going through the health system that's shaped our thinking around it. I remember, kind of being, and this is quite, a lot for people to manage, but, or to, hear, was that when we went for the Australian process, they kind of said, well, look, you kind of have two choices, we either do like a proper autopsy to understand what's happened, or, you kind of get to take her home. And I was like, I want to understand what's happened, because, this is not normal. And, and they completed that process and told us that, there was nothing wrong with our baby. And so it's like, well, why are we in this position then? I want to understand why. But then also you don't have the same closure. And so, really difficult, yeah.
Do you allow yourself to grieve? Or are you so busy at the time you park the grief and deal with it a later time? Or
we definitely grieved that weekend, and we definitely grieved for a long period afterwards.
And it's heartbreaking.
And, it was really heartbreaking. And, I think what was hard about Australia was that we were only about, 6 weeks into our time there. And, we didn't have a support network in place in Australia. We were lucky we brought our au pair with us from New Zealand, who's Swedish, Fanny, who I adore. She's actually just had her second baby. And she was there, and she cancelled all of her, trips that she had planned, and she was amazing and really kind of stepped up. And, James and I lean into each other, like, we're each other's biggest support network. But I do remember that, in that phase, Nadia Lim's husband, Carlos, who's one of the most epic human beings in the world, who I adore, promptly kind of dropped everything and just came over to Australia to help us. And this was in the same phase that Nadia's dad was quite sick and later passed away. And he literally changed like his travel plans, and he was there, and it was a big deal, to just do that and to take the pressure off us in Australia. So, yeah.
It's so humbling.
It's so humbling.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's humbling.
You really find out who your support network is.
Yeah, and like it was just, love them, and so yeah.
And do you think about those kids now?
Yeah, I was kind of having this conversation, and I think about a lot of Mother's Day. I think, look, it's funny because I'm not a hugely philosophical person, but I do look at my daughter, who's a very stubborn thing, right? Like, she's pretty much a mirror image of her mother. And I often say to my husband that, like, Layla just kept coming back to us. And so, like, I think about it in a way that, it was kind of a really long journey to have her. So, intellectually, I understand that these are different, fetuses, and, like, you've had different babies, and, and we've gone through this loss twice before we had her. But when I think about it, I think about all of this love and energy and channeling into Layla. And so that's how I think about it, and that's how I choose to think about it. And, I'm sure people think about these things different ways, right? And everyone deals with it differently. But, we have open conversations with the kids about it. They understand. Layla will often crack open, like, when she meets new people. There should have been 5 of us. And I'm like, oh, gosh, I would have never been a mother of 5. So, But, yeah, like, I like to think that, we have... And actually, my when I lived as an au pair in America... my host mother over there, she said to me, you have the children that you're meant to have. And so, and that was really amazing because it kind of gave me context, right? And so yeah, that's how I try to think about it.
Did you have any therapy or anything to?
Yeah, and look, this is again where I felt really let down by that, and this is how we ended up doing what we're doing today with Tend. And so there is such a big lack of kind of support in this area and how people reach into the system and the things that are made available to you. So the short answer is like maybe a session, but not a lot. And so and it was very much just grief counselling in relation to what we'd gone through rather than kind of preparing you for the phase that happens after that. And so, no, and I think that is a really important part of the puzzle, right? But actually for me, I'm quite an action-orientated, highly resilient human being. And so I often just needs to kind of like, okay, this is a problem now. How do I work on the solution? How do I fix this? Like, what's wrong?
Well, therapy is not for everyone, but I just have an issue with people that knock it before trying it.
Totally.
Try it and it may not be for you. Maybe you don't need it.
Who knocks it though nowadays? I mean, it's such an important way to have a conversation about it. Like, and I think often, a lot of people around you, I think that there's a place for all different types of therapy as well, but also leaning into your community and talking to people who've had similar experiences. And that's where I've found a lot of peace and a lot of comfort was talking to people who had had similar experiences and working through that. And then also when I saw other women, and this happened to other women after me, being the person that reaches out and saying, hey, look, how can I help? This is my experience. This is the things that you need to be thinking about. Here are some of my connections. Like, that was really valuable to me, and I'm hoping it's valuable to other people as well.
Thanks for being so open about this.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not easy to talk about.
No.
I had another guest on the podcast who lost his son to suicide, and I asked him if he wants to talk about it, and he said not really. And he said the reason being it's when he talks about it, it hurts. So he just doesn't like to talk about it, which makes perfect sense. But
look, and I think this is where, because I had these conversations with people, I don't think that it's healthy to measure different griefs. But as a mother of 3 children at the ages that I have now, it is unimaginable for someone to lose a child. It is a different thing to lose a baby and, pregnancy. Versus, losing a baby, within 3. Like, it is a very different. You don't know them as a human being. It's a very different. I can only, and I hope I never, this is. You don't want to compare grief, but I do think that that is unimaginable, and I can totally understand the position of not wanting to talk about it. And look, it was a long period for me where I didn't talk about it, where I found it, I remember when we lost our second baby, the year after we'd lost our first one, working at my food bag, and it's not an easy environment to be pregnant in because they're constantly bloody cooking, which is amazing, but painful if you're pregnant because it's stinky and you're just vomiting the whole time. And so it was really visible to our team that I was pregnant, and so I had to kind of early announce, at about 12 weeks that I was pregnant again, and that we were doing everything that we could for me to, be healthy, but then rocking up to our team and saying, hey, look, guys, this has happened again, taking Tom in to work with us and saying, hey, look, we're really blessed. We have Tom. We're okay. I'm okay. I'm still your leader. Like, I can still be here. And we're going through this, and it's hard, but I still need to show up for my team. And so there is a balance there of me needing to be a leader for the people who look to me on a day-to-day basis and to show that level of, vulnerability, but also at the same time being able to say to my team, I'm still here. And I know that you need me, and so I can't just, and so there's a fine balance there, and I've always given that a lot of thought, right? And so, yeah.
Were you shit scared after losing those 2, getting pregnant again?
Oh, it was awful. Like, I haven't enjoyed a pregnancy since, and, what I found really traumatizing was, and this only was by the time we were pregnant with Layla. So during my second pregnancy, they still kept putting the probe on my tummy, and I remember I had an obstetrician in Auckland, and it was difficult because they didn't understand my fear or concern coming back into New Zealand after what had happened in Australia. They had very little information. We'd sent over all our medical notes, and the obstetrician just kept saying, you're fine. This is fine. This is easy. Great pregnancy. Everything's tracking. We do scans. And then kind of going in at 14 weeks and me saying, I don't feel comfortable. I need another scan. And so they did one, and they labelled it a reassurance scan, and the baby was fine. And then again, I was like, I don't feel comfortable. There's something that's not right. It's 17 weeks this time. And they, sent me for another reassurance scan. And that time, putting the probe on my tummy again, with a big kind of video image. For those of you who haven't been pregnant, there's a big TV, and you can literally see that the baby isn't moving and something is wrong, and that's really traumatizing. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, cool, like she's sleeping, or like, what is she doing? And then going like, this is not normal. But the second time just going, oh my God, like that is just horrific. This has just happened again. And that was the key thing. And I remember I think we had a Welsh or a Scottish radiographer that did the scan, and he obviously knew that we'd had repeat miscarriages because it was written on my form, and he'd known that we'd had a stillborn baby. And I remember him, expressively using language going, fuck, because he himself was so shocked at what he was seeing. It wasn't what he was expecting. And so after that, we actually ended up in the public healthcare system, and I just insisted that they don't turn any of the screens on until they had a heartbeat. And so that was a rule with Layla and with Charlie. They never turned the screens on until they were comfortable, that everything was fine, and then we could turn it on and look at it. Because I just didn't, once you've seen that, you don't want to ever see it again, right? And so, there's a lot of triggers, and I think it helps to talk about it openly, and how you can help kind of mitigate that stress and discomfort for other people is really important to me.
Your marriage seems rock solid. It must have been tough on it at the time, though.
Yeah, I think James and I, when we go through hard times, it brings us closer together rather than apart. And so, he's my biggest rock, my biggest support. And, he's like, look, we don't need to go for more kids. If this is too hard for you, then, but also equally prepared to rock up by my side and be like, no, actually, my wife wants this. And, like, you need to hear her because these are the things that, are important to her. And so, James has always been in my corner, right beside me. He's never missed an appointment. Like, he's there for everything. And that was actually quite hard during COVID because he was kind of forced to miss appointments, like appointments that he could go to, right? But when COVID happened with Charlie, I'd literally have to go into scans by myself. And, I gave birth to Charlie in level 3, and he wasn't allowed to be there in recovery with me, and some of that stuff, it's hard. But I'm really lucky to have found someone who I've been able to, from an early age, but for him and me, like, we're helping to shape each other into better people. And, that is, very, such a privilege, Because
I suppose in adversity like that, it can either bring you closer together or, tear couples apart. I think with JJ and I, with our fertility stuff, like, it was, so I had a procedure that left me with the fertility problems, and then the man's involvement in the fertility treatment is very, very minimal. Like jizz in a cup, and that's basically it. And she had to inject herself for nights and nights on end, and then do all the hard work. And I think for me, it brought a lot of sort of guilt and shame. Yeah,
it's a really hard thing. I mean, I totally understand. And I think what James really struggled with was when I was pregnant with Layla, I ended up on blood thinners, and I had to inject myself every day with blood thinners. And so my belly literally went blue over a period of time. And James would, I think he would feel extremely uncomfortable and, just really aware of my well-being and, just on edge because, something can happen at any point. And so, you're just going through it, and there's not much you can do, you have to just show up. And like, that's the most important thing, is just showing up, being beside someone and empathizing with, the situation that you're in. But you can't take that pain away. You can't take the physical discomfort away. You just got to be there and just be prepared to, be the support person. So, yeah, it's hard. I can see how it can break people. I totally understand that. I can see how it can break relationships. And I think that, it is, a really challenging thing to have to go through, and it's not something that you wish on anyone, right? So, yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all that, Cecilia. I know that these are tough conversations to have, but I think they're important to have as well.
They are,
so someone might be listening to this and realise that and not feel so alone, which is cool.
Oh, totally. And, like, that's where, for me, I was like, I'd never heard of someone my age because I was very young when all of this happened. I was 30, 29, actually, when we lost when we had our first stillborn baby. And I just didn't think it happened to women my age. Like, what was wrong with me? Like, why was I unable to do it? Was it because of, and I think you internalise the fact that it's your fault, and particularly when you're in a high stress role and you're managing a lot of things, you as a woman, you look at yourself and go, it's my fault, right? And it's taken me a long time to understand that, like, that did not contribute to the reasons that I had. And when once, a problem was identified and there were ways to resolve that, I felt better because it just wasn't all on me,
Is this the biggest personal adversity you've gone through?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say this is the hardest thing we've ever had to go through, yeah. Yeah.
But the life of a serial entrepreneur, you go through a lot of adversity.
Oh, you honestly do. And, when Charlie was born, they suspected that he had quite a severe disability, and we went for about 5 days between them kind of telling us that they had a suspicion to kind of going through testing, and it wasn't until he was much older that they actually confirmed that what they suspected he didn't actually have. And that was really hard as well, but it was a different type of hard because this was a human and we loved him and he was here and it was still so rewarding to just have him. But when we went through the pregnancy losses, all we had were loss. Like that was all we had. We just had loss and that was really hard.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah, you want a sip?
Yeah, probably need a sip, yeah. What do you have in here is the question.
We need some vodka or gin if you want.
Yeah.
All right, should we move on to some fun stuff?
Sure.
Business. I feel like you are much more comfortable talking about the business stuff than... Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being so open today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, it's important for other people to hear your journey because otherwise they just see a slice of where you are.
Yeah. But I know it's sort of, opening old wounds, I guess, in a way. So you moved to New Zealand, you meet James, then you're studying at university, you work at this recruitment place, and you start this company called Au Pair Link.
Yes.
What sort of money do you have to start? Like, how do you start a business at 21?
With a student loan that was not meant to be used to start a business. It was a student loan out of Sweden, actually. I did pay it back quite promptly when I could later. And so, I started literally with a student loan. Because in Sweden, what actually happened was that if you study overseas, this is a really bad story, by the way. It makes me sound like a bad person. But they give you an allowance to study overseas in international areas. And when you're not, normally if you're a student in Sweden, it's like a monthly allowance. But in Sweden, they give you a bulk payment if you're studying overseas, because I'm assuming this is, at least this is what it was like 20 years ago. Who knows what they do now. So I used my bulk payment to start Au Pair Link. I had like $500 and I started the website. And then I bought a car so that I could drive to people's houses and interview them to get an au pair. And that's how it started.
And was it successful straight away? Like, did you just have some good luck, or did you?
It took quite a while for it to be. I mean, I think what happened with Au Pair Link is that we started getting like phone calls at like 7 a.m. in the morning and 9 p.m. at night from people that wanted an au pair. And so James is like, that's kind of weird. Clearly there's like a market there. And so, but like it depends on how you define success, right? Because it was really hard. And even when we sold Au Pair Link, like it wasn't a massive company. I think we were turning over about $7 million, which sounds like a lot of money. But like if a lot of that is cost, then, you're not making much and you're paying yourself a minimal amount, then that's really hard. And so, that was a really formative journey for us to be able to refine our business skills and to be able to understand, become really focused on our customers and our journeys. And that was really helpful for us. Yeah.
Yeah, that must be a strange time because you're building this company and clearly it's successful, but you still feel like a broke ass.
Yeah. Yes,
like everything
absolutely.
you've got, I suppose, is paying expenses or going back into the business.
I mean, I remember when we made the decision for me to work full-time on Au Pair Link, and it was really hard because it wasn't earning much money, couldn't really justify it. And so what would happen is that James was working full-time in a corporate job and then his salary would come in to pay the salary of our team inside Au Pair Link, right? And so we literally lived off very little, right? It was really hard.
Did you have any mentors, or who did you go to for advice?
We tried a lot of kind of different mentors over time. One of the early people that I met was someone called Dr. Lee Mathias, who joined our advisory board inside Au Pair Link. And then I met Teresa Gatting through Dame Teresa Gatting. Gosh, beat me with a stick.
These people earn these titles.
Dame Teresa Gatting, or I call her T. So we met T through, she was doing a roadshow for her book that she'd recently published, and I asked her to join our advisory board. And so Dame Teresa and Dr. Lee, initially in that capacity supporting us inside Au Pair Link was really helpful.
What's Dame T like? I'd love to have her on the podcast at some point.
Hilarious,
she's a savage,
honestly.
right?
She is a really funny. She's not a corporate, like you'd assume as being the first CEO of a public listed company in New Zealand that she'd be like this kind of cookie cat corporate lady, and she's like the opposite. Like she's an exotic, I used to call her an exotic like cat lady, but now she has a dog called Ollie, who's named after her cat that she used to have. And so she is, she's a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure. I
can't imagine the stories she'd have. She was CEO of Telecom at a time where there were very few women in positions that. And the bullshit she must have had to cut through.
For sure. And she's seen everything, right? So it's quite helpful. And, she's a phenomenal lady and someone who, obviously is one of my best friends and someone who I'm incredibly close to and who, I talk to all the time, right? So, yeah.
So, you managed to sell Au Pair Link. Do you do it right out of that? Do you talk about figures and things?
I don't talk about figures, but no, we sold Au Pair Link. That was really, we were able to buy our first home with the proceeds from that. So, that was really fantastic. And still with a mortgage though, obviously, at the time. But yeah, we were able to buy our first home. And I think often I look back and I kind of go, if we would have been in good corporate careers, we probably would have earned a similar amount to get us to that point. But the lessons that we learned were priceless, right? So that's really what we took away out of it.
Yeah, so the business, so from there you went into My Food Bag.
Yeah.
So very, very different business, going from like nannying kids to food.
Yeah.
But I suppose there's a lot of principles in business and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, totally. And it's like that relentless focus on the customer, right? And it doesn't matter what you're doing, that actually being really focused on the customer is probably the most important thing in being successful in business. And so we really honed that skill set and made sure that we were relentlessly customer focused. And we'd actually started, My Food Bag at the same time as we had OPL Link, and that was obviously what was driving some of the stress for me as well. And, My Food Bag kind of did become an overnight success in a way. Like we went from, zero revenue to turning over 100 million within the space of less than 2 years. And that was, exponential growth. I remember Sam Morgan saying to me, like, TradeMe didn't even do that, Cecilia. Like, cut yourself some slack, don't be so hard on yourself. And
do you know Sam?
Yeah, we've got we chat occasionally. And so...
What's he doing now? That's a name I haven't heard in maybe a decade.
Yeah. No, he's a quality person. He does a lot of charitable stuff and does it incredibly quietly. And, he is a person that is incredibly philanthropic. And, someone who I've got a huge amount of respect and admiration for.
Yeah, for anyone that doesn't know, Sam Morgan started TradeMe in New Zealand and sold it to Fairfax for something like $700 million. Yeah. His dad's the crazy cat man.
Yes, yeah.
We should get Gareth Morgan and Dame Teresa in a room together.
It would actually be really funny. That would be quality. That would be good TV.
Yeah, I've got the timeline here for My Food Bag, and it seems all very neat. So, how are you doing for time?
I probably have 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes?
Yeah, is that okay? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2010, you had the idea for My Food Bag while you were in Sweden.
Yeah.
2012, it's launched. 2014, it's up to 65 million turnover.
Yeah.
And then 2016, sold.
Yeah, wow, yeah.
Crazy. How do you start with an idea as daunting as My Food Bag? Like, where do you begin?
I think, again, naivety and curiosity. So we'd seen this kind of concept over in, Europe, and I have got one of those husbands who kind of like loves to eat, hates to cook, and would constantly in a standoff about, what are we having for dinner tonight? And he'd be like, whatever's easy. And I'm like, it's not easy to come up with it. So saw the concept for My Food Bag. I was pregnant with Tom at that point and went on maternity leave, and I kind of done everything that you're meant to do, which is, fill the freezer and cook and clean and set up the nursery. And then in between him being late, I was convinced he was going to be Swedish and turn out being on time, but he wasn't. And so wrote the business plan and kind of press, save, and then went into labour. And then 6 weeks later, we were presenting it. I actually think it was 3 weeks later to OPL Link's board. So it went really quickly. And I think, I look back at that journey and I go, probably some of the decisions that we made coming out of it wouldn't have been the same if we hadn't gone through the personal trauma that we did. I think, we lost a baby in 2014, we lost a baby in 2015, and then, we had Layla in 2016, and very close to her being born, we sold the business broadly, or largely, 70% of it. And so, I think all of those kind of decisions that you have in your personal life kind of shapes your business decision, and we were just exhausted at that point.
What was the biggest obstacle to getting My Food Bag off the ground?
I think that, I remember someone saying to me, like, this is kind of like doing a photo shoot with, like, kittens and babies. Like, you don't want to do that. Like, what are you doing? And it's a logistical challenge of it. Like, trying to bring, fresh food to people's houses is really hard, like the cold chain and the risks that you carry. And particularly no one had done it before. Like, nowadays it just seems common, practice. But back in the days when we did it, it was completely unique and new. And so there were lots of complexity and learning on the job. And but I love the challenge of it.
Yeah, so one thing I found amazing, sometimes I'll go to McDonald's and there'll be something missing from my bag.
Yeah.
But My Food Bag, there's never been a missing spring onion, eh?
I'm glad that it's never missing, but yeah.
But it seems like there's a huge amount of scope for things to go wrong. And
there is, yeah. I mean, all of our, our key performance indicators that we've had we've always tracked that, the number of, mispicks or, the delivery timeframes that you have, all of those are key things that you look at as a business as a key metric to measure your success from that past weekend. And there have been weeks that our metrics, in particular in the early days, went great, and you look yourself in a mirror as a CEO and you try to do better, right? And you're constantly holding yourself to the highest account there. So yeah, it's a lot of things that go on. And I remember, in My Food Bag, I think what was hard was that because My Food Bag was a weekend business, you'd work all week and then we'd be doing packing Friday, Saturday, and we delivered on a Sunday. And so you never had a day off. Like, it was just relentless. And if something went wrong, it would always go wrong on Sunday. And so, you dread Sunday, right? Because that would be the day of the week that, everything, if something was bad, that's the day that it would happen. And so I said to someone the other day, I was actually joking because I just recently turned 40, and one of my birthdays, Nadia actually had her first baby, Bodhi, on my birthday, but that year that I was pregnant with Layla in 2016, I was literally barefoot and pregnant inside my food bag's customer service office because we'd identified a case of listeria in our spinach, and we needed to go through and manage that. And meanwhile, Nadia was opting out of it, giving birth. You know, how inconsiderate, right?
Priorities, Nadia.
I was like, what are you doing? Thankfully, it was on my birthday, though, so I feel like I could forgive her for that. But those are the days that you remember, right? Like, you know, how again, you're just fronting up, you know, you're highly, it doesn't matter. You just, you know, it was hard.
How did you get Nadia involved? She was sort of a key component in it, I feel like.
Yeah, she was. I actually, we'd looked at like a range of different people who we wanted to be part of the business, people like Josh Emmett or Chelsea at that point, who had recently won MasterChef, and Nadia had won the year prior. And so I'd worked her into the business plan and actually developed a business plan for her, which was called My Food Bag Without Nadia Lim, because I didn't want her to know how much we actually wanted her. And so I reached out to her, had a response from her husband, Carlos, who, came straight back to us and said, cool, let's catch up. He thought we were going to do something like baby food. But actually, obviously, it was My Food Bag instead. And they jumped on a flight to Europe and then came back 3 weeks later and told us that they were in. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, being you mentioned her husband Carlos before, and just how much of a support he was. So you obviously have a great relationship with those guys.
Yeah.
There was an incident a few years ago where some richless guy criticised her, called her like Euro Asian fluff or something.
Yeah,
it's a real nasty character attack.
Yeah,
as a friend, like how is that for you? Like, what do you do?
Well, I mean, I'm still mad about it. It still makes me incredibly angry. And just for context there, you know, Nadia, because it was in regards to My Food Bag's IPO, which happened in 2021. There was a lot of companies that listed in that period, and the share markets, as we all know, have been really wobbly on and off since that period. And Nadia was criticised for her involvement in the IPO, which was completely irrelevant, to be completely blunt. There was one photo of Nadia in the prospectus document, which was, you know, a completely normal photo of someone. And, this person picked up on it, and I don't even want to say his name. And it was just wild. And what was frustrating, I think, was that, you know, the founder group had sold My Food Bag, you know, 4 or 5 years before it listed. You know, we were no longer CEOs, we were no longer on the board, and we had no control of the company. And suddenly this group of women are being blamed for something that wasn't of our making by someone who didn't know what they were talking about, and he got all this airtime to undermine her. So, I mean, what do you do? I'm a kind of an actions and solutions person, so, you know, in that period after that had happened, you know, went back onto My Food Bag's board and obviously supported Nadia. And, like, I'm really proud, you know, our CEO who's come in, who's a guy called Mark Winter, came in that same phase as I came back. He's done a phenomenal job with the business, right? He's one of the most amazing leaders in this country. And, you know, I'm just so proud to be involved with the business again today. But that was a really hard period for all of us. And, you know, I think what you do, you're measured by your actions, right? And our action was to take action to, you know, to make sure that we were involved again, and me in particular. And, you know, bringing in a new CEO who's proven to be incredibly capable and a phenomenal leader, you know.
Yeah. She must have been so hurt and humiliated.
Oh, look, it's a
terrible.
difficult thing. It would be for anyone, right? You know, and Nadia's just like me. We're both really resilient human beings. And so, you know, it's just about, you know, I think the hardest thing is when people make assertions about you now in public, and even if they're completely inaccurate, or, you know, they still get their airtime on it. And so there's no consequence for people spouting off things that are simply not true, and that you can prove are not true. And, you know, there's already, you know, 50 different, you know, other people retweeting or say whatever the heck they want, and there's no repercussions for that. And that's a hard thing, right?
What was the day like when you finally sell My Food Bag? What's that like being in that? It's a situation that most people listening to this or watching this will never experience. Yeah. Is it is it like a champagne day, or?
It was funny. Like, my husband literally came home. I remember, because I'd got home earlier than him, and he must have been doing something in the office to kind of close it. And I was home with Tom and Layla, who was very little at that point, and he kind of, you know, grabbed a beer out of the fridge, and he was like, "Okay, yeah, like, big day." But, you know, a lot of things didn't change for us as a family. Like, we stayed living in the same little bungalow that we'd had before we'd had that transaction. and we lived in that house for like another 4 years after it. We made sure that, you know, with our parents, that it was a real priority for us to ensure that our parents had a lot of support around them. So, you know, we made sure that, you know, we helped our parents with that, and that they have got, you know, financial security and all of those things. That was important for us as well. So, you know, you choose how it changes you, right? You know, James and I have always been focused on giving back to our community. We've always been focused on being present parents, and, you know, you choose the type of person that you want to be, and you acknowledge the fact that you are incredibly privileged. And yeah, that's how we think about it.
Did you buy anything cool? Did you treat yourself?
The first car that we bought after this, and it's actually quite funny, he bought us like a Tiguan. Like, it was like he bought us, which we still have. We still have that one. So
it's not overly extravagant.
We did buy a beach house. That was kind of the key thing that we really wanted, and we'd kind of identified a spot that we wanted. That was kind of the key thing that we did for ourselves after. But yeah, that was kind of it. And so we were just happy. Like, you know, I think that, you know, happiness isn't getting what you want, it's wanting what you have. And like, we wanted what we already had. We loved our little house that we were in with our family. We, you know, were so lucky that we had healthy children, that we'd finally had Layla, you know, and so we wanted what we already had. It didn't change us. It didn't change the happiness that we had, you know, if that makes sense. But, you know, I'm not going to say that it doesn't make a big difference to have financial freedom, because it absolutely does. Like, you know, it changes, you know.
Yeah, it hasn't changed your hunger, though, your hunger or your drive.
No.
Was part of you worried that it potentially would?
No, I don't think I'd ever worried about that. No, I just, I did just, your problems that you want to solve for are much bigger. And so, you know, it didn't kind of strike me as if that would be a risk, you know.
This has been so much fun. There was so much more to talk about. We barely touched upon the
I'm
team
sorry.
stuff. You're a busy lady. Where are you off to next?
I'm actually going into a meeting with Ngāti Whātua Oraki, who is a really amazing partner of TENS, and we do a lot of work in the healthcare space together. And so, you know, I'm really passionate about health equity. And health access, and, you know, I think it's, you know, it's a really interesting conversation to be had around how we can reach our communities throughout New Zealand. And, you know, many people say that the health system is really, you know, the system will say that people are really hard to reach and bring into the system, but actually the system is hard to reach, and, you know, for people trying to engage with it. And so I'm really interested in, how do you break down barriers? How do you make sure that people access the care when they need it, and in the way that is most suitable to them at a price that, you know, they can afford? And so, yeah, those are the types of things that are, you know, top of mind, and ensuring that we can kind of build a sustainable healthcare system into the future. And I feel quite amped about that. Like, I genuinely think that we can build the best healthcare system in the world. You know, I look at our problems and I see opportunities. And so if I look back at this, you know, at the end of my life, and I can see that we have significantly changed healthcare outcomes, that all of these articles that we will see every winter about how access is terrible and all of these things, if we can get a handle on some of those things and genuinely turn the corner on, you know, how we can build healthier communities into the future, that would be the most amazing reward, right? So, yeah.
Well, thanks for choosing New Zealand. We're lucky to have you.
Thank you.
And this meeting sounds very, very important. I don't think you can walk into that room and say, sorry, I was late, I was doing Dom's podcast.
Oh, no, I definitely will, though. I absolutely will.
No,
I will blame you.
No.
I'll blame you.
Hey, can we just end with some quick fire from my sponsors? The Generate Kiwi Saver Scheme have been wonderful. $500 to a charity of your choice if you answer these questions. What's your favourite charity? Where would you like the money to go?
Oh, it's a really hard question, because we support a broad range of charities. Just because I was recently there and I saw how phenomenal they are, the team at Starship is always outstanding. And I think there's a lot of work that can continue to be done in that space. But there's probably, you know, variety would be another one. So, yeah. Quick fire. You said that. I'll stop talking now.
Okay. Maybe we can do two. Variety and Starship. Okay. Cecilia Robinson, what's the best piece of advice you've been given about money?
What's the best piece of advice I've been given about money? I think, you know, you always have to budget as if you don't have it. You know, I think that's really important. And so just making sure that, you know, you are really conscious about the decisions that you make, and is it a want or is it a need, right? And that's still a question that, you know, it doesn't matter what your kind of, you know, financial position should be. You should ask yourself this: is it a want or is it a need? And then you have to be comfortable with what the answer is.
What's been your worst money mistake?
Worst money mistake. Probably buying a car that rusted out in about the space of a year, and should have probably looked into the type of car a bit closer.
What was it?
I can't actually. It was. They probably will get to me. No, I won't say what brand it was. Okay.
Does money buy you happiness?
Absolutely not. No.
Are you a spender or a saver?
A saver.
What's been your biggest money mistake? Oh, we've asked that one. Worst money mistake. Where would you like to retire?
In New Zealand, on a beach, on a tangi.
Oh, in Waiheke?
Yes,
right.
100%.
Why so?
That's where our beach house is.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's where, I love that space. It's got a really special place in our hearts.
How much of a nest egg do you think would be a good amount for retirement for someone?
Well, look, I mean, I think that when you're thinking, this is a much broader, and because I'm also a director of a KiwiSaver company, I would say, I think when you say at a quantum like $1 million, it sounds like a lot to people, but actually we have to prepare for the fact that we have to live for much longer, and we have to think about the mechanics of how that works. So I don't have probably an easy answer, but I think you need a lot more than what you think you do.
What's some KiwiSaver advice you'd give to everyone?
KiwiSaver is really important, and if you're not joined up, join. Like, make sure that you're part of a program, make sure that you know that you're making your contributions, make sure that you're maximising them, because I think what's really important about it is that, it's really easy to think about what your wants are today, but actually your needs in the future are really equally important. And so separating those two things out, is really important, and I think it's a phenomenal thing to be part of.
And last one, best thing about being a Kiwi?
Everything. I love being Kiwi. I'm so lucky to be. The fact that I don't just feel lucky to be here, but I feel like the fact that I've got my citizenship and this is my home, right? So I'm a chosen Kiwi, and I love it.
Well, thanks so much for choosing New Zealand. Sweden, we're sorry. She's ours and we love her.
Thank you.